All right, so sorry, I had to start live streaming first. Let me share my screen again. Okay, once again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's KD session. On today's KD session, we are going to be looking at a topic called story points in Scrum. Now, why is this topic important? It's important because at some point, if not already, we are going to be part of a Scrum team. And in Beacom Dev Center, the approved method of managing a project or a product is Agile methodology. And one of the very common frameworks of Agile is Scrum. Now, let's understand what Scrum is before we start looking into story points, how to estimate story points, and how to assign story points to user stories. Is important for us to know what Scrum is and also what those user stories are. So story points, as I said earlier, is an agile framework, and it is basically designed to allow teams to collaborate and solve problems through iterative and iterative work, right? So what a Scrum team basically do is they look at a large project and then they break it down into smaller bits known as chunks. And they work on these small bits or chunks in a time frame called sprints. Right. So now, what is a user story? A user story is um, basically an informal explanation of a software feature written from the user's point of view. So there is a very common structure that most Scrum teams usually use, where you have as who am I, what do I want, and why do I want this thing. So I'll give an example of a user story. As let's say an admin or as a techie, I want to be able to reset my password so that I'll be able to gain access to my dashboard. So for you to be able to write a proper user story, you should be able to understand who this person is, who is the person first. What do they want? What do they want you to do for them? That's like the feature. What feature? What do they want? And then why? What is the value or what is the benefits that they are going to derive from this feature? Okay, let's go into the topic proper. So, 1 minute. Let's get this down. The learning objective at the end of this session, you should be able to understand what story points are, different story points, differentiate story points from ours, estimate user stories using story points, understand how story points relate to sprint planning and capacity, and lastly, apply story points consistently within a Scrum team. Okay, let's make this bolder. So, what exactly is a story point? A story point is a relative measure of the efforts required to complete a user story. Now, when we say efforts is basically the amount of active work that needs to be done to complete a user story. And it's important that you understand the word active there, because knowing the efforts that is going to take to complete a work would allow you to be able to estimate a duration to complete that task or that user story. Let me give you an example. Say you want to paint your room, right? And now you call the painters to say, please, I want you to help me to paint my room. For you to be able to estimate how long that work is going to take, that task is going to take to be completed, you need to understand the active work that needs to be done inside there, and also identify the time it will take for the inactive work. Now, The active work there is the hands-on, the time it will take to do the hands-on tasks that the painter will need to do to complete to be able to paint your room. That includes screeding, if it's a situation whereby the painter would have to screed the room first. The time the painter is going to put in, or the effort is going to put in to mix the paint, and then the time he will now take to now start painting the room. Now that is active work, because that's the work, the time he's actually doing something with his hands. But you also need to factor in the inactive work inside there. The inactive work there is, when you want to paint a room, it takes at least, I don't know, but I think the estimate I can give now is like 3 coatings before you properly get the color you're looking for, depending on maybe if the color initially that room is painted before is like yellow, and then you want to take it to white. Sometimes you can even do up to like 4 coatings before you get that perfect white. Now, if you're coating a room, if you put the first coating, like first painting, you need to first of all allow it to dry up before you add the second one again. You coat the second time, you allow it to dry again. Now, that time you're allowing it to dry up is inactive work there, because the painter is not actually doing something at that point. You're not doing anything with their hands, but you also need to calculate to be able to estimate the duration, the amount of time it is going to take to actually complete that task. But bringing it back to story point estimation and efforts in estimating story points, we are looking at just the active work alone. Now, this active work is not just the physical work that needs to be done. Let's say, for example, you have a user story that the user just wants to be able to reset password. Now, you're not just calculating the time, the efforts the developer is going to put in to type the code. What about the time, the effort they are going to put in to actually think it through? How am I going to design this? How am I going to implement this? That is effort for you. Now, for a Scrum team to be able to assign story points to user stories, they need to look at this factor. These are the factors that affect that or influence their decision on what story points that they are supposed to give to a user story. Now, the first factor is called complexity. Please, let's still confirm we can hear me so that I know I'm not speaking to myself.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So the first factor is complexity. Complexity simply means they look at the user story and then they try to understand how difficult is it to complete that user story? How difficult is it to design this user story? How difficult is it to implement this user story? How difficult is it to understand what needs to be done in this user story, right? I'll give you guys an example. We are going to use 2 examples to understand whether the complexity is high, medium, or low. First example, maybe the user just wants you to change a logo that is existing in a landing page. They want you to change it from whatever that is there to the actual organization logo. Now, looking at this feature now that this user wants you to do for them, it's not difficult to understand. It's also it's not difficult at all to implement it or design, because it's something as easy as changing one image to another image. Now, the complexity there is low. But in a situation whereby the user says, oh, that they want to be able to reset their password. Now, it might not be difficult for you to understand that, oh, what the user wants is to be able to reset password. But to design this feature and to also implement it, you start looking at how are we going to verify this user? Do we need to, first of all, tell them to put their email address, and then we can now send them maybe a token? And then from that token, are we going to send them another link that they are going to use to change their password? In a situation whereby they've reset that password so many times, are we going to say, okay, we need you to put in a recent password that you've used before you put in the new one? So all these things are like various things that needs to be thought through, that needs to be done. And when you look at this complexity, you would say that you look at the complexity of this user story, you would say it is medium. You cannot say it's high because there are more ones that are like more difficult and all. But in this one, in this reset password, the complexity is like on a medium level. Now let's look at the next one. The next one is the amount of work. When you say amount of work literally means the quantity of tasks that needs to be completed to complete that user story. The quantity of tasks that needs to be done to complete that user story. Some user stories have like very small tasks that needs to be done in them, while the tasks that needs to be completed are like larger. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have what a user wants you to do for them is to add a button, maybe to a, what are we going to say? Maybe to a login page. They want a button there, right? So if you look at this, the amount of work that needs to be done to add a button is not like that much. But take an instance where a user tells you that what they want is to be able to click something and then they will be able to view their entire application on a dark mode view. Now, you're not thinking of just implementing that dark mode view in just one page. You're thinking about implementing it in so many other pages. So now the amount of work that needs to be done is larger because you're going to do that dark mode in the login page. You're going to do it in the dashboard. You're also going to do it in the settings. You're going to do it in the profile page. So the amount of work that needs to be done becomes larger. The third feature here is risk. Risk is just basically the chances that something is going to go wrong during the implementation of that user story. What are the chances that something is going to go wrong while this developer is trying to implement this user story? I'll give us an example. Maybe the first example is the user wants you to updates the wordings in an About Us page. Every website has like this About Us page where they talk about who they are, what they are doing, and all. So now, if a user says they want you to update the information, now there's an existing About Us page already. They just want you to change the wordings there to something else. If you look at the amount of risk involved in this, it is very low. What are the chances that something can go wrong while trying to just do like a copy and paste? It's slim, right? It is low. But look at a situation whereby a user said that what they want to do is to migrate their payment record from one database to another database. Now, the chances that something is going to go wrong while you are trying to migrate is very high because data can start missing while you're trying to migrate that payment record. Or maybe when you've finally done everything and user tries to pay, something might go wrong with the payment and it will affect the customers. So the risk is high. Now, let's look at another factor, which is uncertainty. Uncertainty is just how much does the team know about this user story? How much do they know how they are going to be able to complete this user story? Do they know the challenges that they are going to face while trying to implement this user story? The less the team knows about the user story, the more the uncertainty, the higher the uncertainty. The more they know, the lower the uncertainty. Let me give you guys an example. Let's say, for example, now, a user wants to they want you to add a registration form to maybe a landing page or a website. Now, the uncertainty in this user story is very low. Reason is that most Scrum team, they've added, it's a very simple work that they've done countless times, right? Or at least once. So they already know how to go about completing this user story. They know what needs to be done. They also know the challenges that they can face while trying to implement this user story or this feature. Now, in a situation whereby what the user is demanding from you is that they want you to be able to integrate maybe a third-party AI API into an existing application. Now, the uncertainty there is high. Reason is because The team might, first of all, this third-party AI is newly launched. They don't have so much information about it, one. Secondly, they might not have done anything like that before, integrating an AI into the app. So they know very little on how to do this, which means that the uncertainty there is high. Now, looking at the next factor, which is the testing effort. Testing effort is just basically the amount of work that needs to be done to test a user story, right? So let me give us another example. A user can tell you that, oh, what I want to do is I want you to change the background of maybe a web page or a landing page from, which color are we going to use now? Maybe from white to green. It's very easy for you to test this thing because it's something as simple as just clicking on the link to the landing page and check it. It's glaring there and know whether it has changed from white to green. Very simple. But look at a situation whereby you're testing a user story that you implemented where the user wants you to be able to design like maybe like a checkout page in an online shopping platform. Now, you know that there are so many things you need to test here. You need to first of all test to see if the methods of payments are working. If you're going to be using debit card payments, is it working? You have to test it. If there is something like maybe a discount, how will the discount be subtracted from the total amount? If there's something like, say, the user has a coupon, how is everything going to, the entire checkout page, how is it going to play out, right? So a lot of testing needs to be done in this part. So the testing effort is going to be high. The last one here is integration efforts. The amount of work is going to take to integrate this feature that you've built to the already existing part of the application or services, right? Or systems. How is it going to, like, what is the communication going to be like? You have to test it to ensure that it communicates with the other system or with the other parts of the application. Let's give another example. Let's say a user wants you to add a, what's this thing called again? A text field in a what's it called? In a profile page. Now, this text field can just be where the user will just tell us about themselves. Oh, my name is Idimachuku. I am a project manager, something like that, just a text field. You now know that you're just integrating it to the just the profile page only. But look at a situation whereby what the user wants you to do for them is to add a Google sign-in option to the login page. Now, you know that you're not just integrating it to one thing. You have to first of all think about the Google OAuth, right? You're also going to think about how it's going to communicate, check if it's communicating well with the login page itself, and also look at the overall registration format, how everything is going to play out. So these factors are what the Scrum team look at, they consider before they finally assign a story point to a user story. Kindly note that story points do not measure time because most of the time Scrum team trying to misplace it with time, which is not supposed to be so. Moving on, we are going to look at the difference between story points and hours. So story points uses relative estimates. When you say relative estimate is just a technique that is used to measure the complexity, the size of a user story by comparing it to an already completed similar user story. Meanwhile, for hours measure exact time estimate. Also, story points measures effort, while hours measures duration. And lastly, story points account for uncertainty, while hours does not account for uncertainty. Okay, what influences story points? We've talked about this already where we are trying to explain the factors that influences story points. So I'm not going to be doing much explanation on this. We're just going to list it. Number one, how complex is this user story? Number two, how much work is involved? Number three, how many systems are affected? Number four, are there dependencies? Now, what is dependencies? I'll give you guys an example. You have two user story, and one user story could be that the user wants to be able to, the first user story now will be that the user wants to be able to view their dashboard. And then the second user story will be that the user wants to be able to maybe sign in to their application. Now, the first user story, the completion of the first user story depends on the completion of the second user story. So for you to be able to complete the first user story, you need to first of all complete the second user story. And that is what dependency is. And also you need to think of how much testing is required. And lastly, is there technical uncertainty? Now, the story points now. The very common one or story point that is used is the Fibonacci scale. There is another one, I think about, there are many. I think I know about five. But the second one I can remember is the t-shirts estimation method. The t-shirt estimation method is where you have extra small, all those sizes you see in like in a t-shirt, extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, and all that. But the very common one that Scrum team uses is the Fibonacci scale, where you have 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and 21. And the gap increases because the uncertainty increases as work becomes larger. The representation of each of these story points. So one story point typically means that the user story is a very small change. Example, say you already have a user wants you to change the button, the sign up button from green to red. So you already have the sign up button feature, but the user just wants you to change the color. So the change, you're just making a very small change. So in this type of user story, you can just assign one story point to it. Now, two story points, if you are going to assign two story points, is mostly for small enlargement. Small enlargement is basically when you're going to add a little capability to an already existing feature. Let me give you guys an example. You know this, what are they calling it again? This where you're supposed to, when you're signing up and you're supposed to put your username and then you put your password. This small capability can just be, you just want to add a small button by the side where the user can just click to view their password, to see the alphabet that they are typing in their password, because normally it's just an asterisk. You will not be able to see it. So the small capability you want to add could just be to just a button where they will click to view the password. That type of user story, you can just give it 2 points. 3 points is basically for medium-sized feature, and 5 points is for large feature, 8 points for very large feature, and lastly 13 points to large feature. We also have the 21, that's for extremely large. When you see your point self trying to assign 13 points or 21 points to a user story, just know it's better for you to just split that user story into 2 or even 3 user stories. I don't have enough time more. Okay, let's use this user story example to consider all the factors we've listed so far and then see what points we are going to assign to this user story. So as a user, I want to reset my password so that I can regain access to my account. Now, looking at the uncertainty now, would you say the uncertainty is high, low, or medium? Anybody? Is there anybody that wants to help us? Okay. The uncertainty in this case is medium. Medium because um medium because the team already has probably done something like this, similar to this before. So they have knowledge of the work that needs to be done. They already know the challenges that they are going to face. So your certainty is medium. You're also going to look at the amount of work that needs to be done. The amount of work is also medium. Now look at the risk involved. The risk involved is very high because if anything goes wrong with this particular thing, somebody else can gain access to somebody else's dashboard or account, and then they can do away with their personal information, which is not right. So the risk is high. So all these things are what you're going to consider. Considering all those factors, I'm trying to rush so that we're able to finish up faster. This, I would say these story points should have a 5 point. 5 points because you cannot say 3, because 3 points is more like when you're just making small feature, small changes, right? But this is not small, because considering other things you've looked at, the factors, the perfect story point to it for it is 5. Now moving on, we are going to look at story points. This one, which is story points are not coding time, because sometimes people mistake story points for the coding time. For you to be able to understand story points, you're thinking about you need to understand the requirements that are involved. You need to understand designing the solution. You need to think of the writing the code, the AI prompt iterations if it's a situation whereby you're doing vibe coding. You also look at the integration, look at debugging, look at testing, documentation, and code review. So story points are not coding time. Okay, story points and capacity. Capacity answers how much time does the team have for this sprint, while story point answers how much work can the team realistically complete for that sprint. I'm going to explain more on this, but let's look at velocity first. Velocity is the total story points completed during a sprint. Now, you have a sprint. This one would require calculator. You have a sprint of, say, okay, let's start with velocity first. To calculate velocity is more like if you've completed like a first sprint, a second sprint, and a third sprint. Let's say for first sprint, you and your team, you guys were able to complete, say, 10 story points, right? You did the second sprint, you guys were also able to complete 10 story points. And then the third one, still the same 10 story points. Now, for you to know the velocity or the amount of story points your team is going to be able to complete for the next sprint, which is probably going to be the fourth sprint, what you need to do is to calculate the previous 3 sprints, which is 10, 10, 10, 30, divided by the number of sprints, which is 3 sprints, and that is going to give you a 10 story point. So for you guys to be able to do the fourth sprint, you can say estimate to complete 10 story points, because 10 is the velocity that you got, considering so far that your capacity remains constant. That's another thing. Now, let's talk about capacity now. Take, for instance, you have 4 developers working in a project with you. For you to calculate the capacity, that's the amount of time your team has to commit to that project. You're going to first of all look at the amount of time each developer has. Now, let's start. Who do we have on this call? We have Gloria. Let's say Gloria is one of our developers now. Gloria is supposed to work for Bincom 8 hours per day, 9 to 5. And in a week, she has to work for Bincom for 40 hours. Let's assume that the sprint time frame is just 1 week. Now, 40 hours, Gloria has 40 hours to for Bincom. But you're not going to say because she has 40 hours, she has to commit the entire 40 hours to the sprint. For you to calculate the capacity, you have to look at what other commitment does Gloria have for Bincom. You now have to look at the time for her normal team stand-up. Now, let's say for the normal team stand-up, she has to do her stand-up 1 hour per day. That's in 5 days. It's going to give you 5. You subtract 5 hours from the already existing 40, which is going to give you remainder 35. You also think of the meetings that you're going to have in between for your scrum. The meetings like the daily scrum for the project, to you're going to think of the sprint planning, the sprint retrospective, and also the sprint review. Let's say everything sums up to give you about 5 hours for the week. You minus another 5 hours, and that will give you 30 remaining. You also need to think of, does Gloria have holidays that she will need to attend? Is there any public holiday for that week? Is there any personal leave that Gloria has? So all these things are what, let me just summarize it. Everything that you need to subtract before you end up with that capacity. Let's say, for example, at the end of the day, you have just 30 hours for Gloria alone. And that same thing, you have to do it for the remaining developers, for the remaining 3 developers, because you have 4. Let's say at the end of the day, all of them have the same 30, 30, 30. So that would give you a total of 120 hours that the team has to commit to the work for that sprint. Now, while you're selecting, let's say, for example, you've done your first 3 sprints and you have a story point of, you guys are able to complete 10 story points for the 4th sprint. Say one of your developers is now absent, right? Say Gloria, I don't know, anything can happen, and then she will not be available for that 4th sprint. Now, your capacity has been affected. You don't longer have that 100% capacity because you have the full 4 developers available. Now, you have to look at how is this capacity going to affect the amount of sprints you guys are going to complete. If you're able to do the 100% before, that's the 100% of that sprint of story points, which is 10 before. Now, you have to consider removing 25% and you have 75% remaining, because one of your team members, since you have 4%, one of the developers is not going to be available. You're removing 25% and you're just working with 75. So using that 75 now, 75 multiplied by 10 divided by 100, that will leave you at 7.5. So you guys can only complete, say, maybe 8 story points for that next sprint, which is going to be for the 4th sprint. Please take note that when you're calculating the capacity, you're just considering the development team only. You're not considering the product owner, and also you're not considering the scrum master. You're just looking at the people that are actually going to be doing the work that needs to be done to complete the story points and the products, the sprint backlog. Moving on, I'm trying to rush. Already exactly that time. So common mistakes, estimation mistakes. 1, converting story point directly into hours, estimating only coding efforts, ignoring testing, ignoring uncertainty, ignoring technical risk, allowing one person to estimate without team discussion. And then story point process, story point estimation process. First of all, you and your team need to read this the user story, read your acceptance criteria, clarify questions, discuss complexity, discuss uncertainty, and then finally select a story point for that user story, and also confirm within the team that everybody agrees with it. And best practices: number 1, estimate as a team. Number 2, keep story points relative. Number 3, review estimates after every sprint. Number 4, use sprint retrospective to improve estimation. Number 5, sorry, let velocity improve naturally over time. And lastly, focus on consistency rather than perfection. Key takeaways: story points measure effort and not time. Complexity, uncertainty, and risk influence estimates. 3, capacity and story points complement each other. 4, velocity improves sprint planning. And lastly, teams become better at estimating through experience. Thank you very much. This is the end of our presentation today. Thank you. Thank you, Austin. Is there any question? Do we have
Hello,
any
good morning.
question?
I have
Yes, good morning to
question.
you.
I just want to clarify. You mentioned story points, and where you're also explaining, you talk about user story. So I just
Mhm.
want to know the difference between story point and user story. I know user story, but just to know more about story points.
Okay. Story points is like a relative estimate of the amount of work, right? Amount of effort that is going to be put in to finish up that user story. And I told us that we use the Fibonacci scale. You already understand what a user story is. So all these user story, we are going to assign story points to them. Story points is like the effort, is the work, the amount of work we need to put into place to be able to do that, to complete that user story, where you are going to select, is this user story, are we going to give it a 1 point? Should we give it 2 points based on, after checking all the factors we've listed, the complexity, the uncertainty, the risk, everything, all the 5 factors, you look at it and then agree with your team. How many points are we supposed to give this? Should we give it 1? Does this user story deserve a 1 point? Or should we give it a 2 points? Should we give it 3? Is it 8? Is it 5? Is it 21? Or is it 13? Do you understand?
All right, thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other question?
I don't think we're able to take any other question. It's almost
All right.
time for stand up.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you for the wonderful presentation. See you guys tomorrow.